My name is Gabriel Thorne, and I'm about to share something that completely transformed my understanding of life, death, and everything in between. What I experienced during those 11 minutes and 15 seconds when my heart stopped beating wasn't just another near-death experience. It was a divine appointment that shattered every preconception I had about eternity. But before I tell you about the night that changed everything, you need to understand who I was before it all happened. I never planned to be a police officer. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in East Memphis, I had dreams of becoming an architect. I loved the idea of creating spaces that would shape people's lives, of leaving a tangible mark on the skyline. My father, James Thorne, worked as a high school physics teacher, and my mother, Sarah, ran a small bakery from our home. They were good, honest people who taught me the value of hard work and integrity, but they never pushed their beliefs on me. Our family attended Riverside Community Church, a modest congregation where faith was more about tradition than transformation. Every Sunday, we'd sit in the same pew, third row from the back, and go through the motions. I knew all the stories: Noah's Ark, David and Goliath, Jesus walking on water, but they remained just that: stories. Like most teenagers, I developed a healthy skepticism toward anything that couldn't be proven empirically. My father's scientific mindset had rubbed off on me more than my mother's quiet faith. Everything changed during my freshman year of college. I was studying architecture at the University of Memphis when a series of gang-related shootings rocked our community. One victim was Katie Martinez, a 12-year-old girl who had been caught in crossfire while walking home from school. She was the daughter of our next-door neighbors, and I had often watched her playing in her front yard, her laughter carrying over the fence as I worked on my car. The day of her funeral, something broke inside me. Sitting there in that church, watching her parents crumble under the weight of their grief, I realized that all the beautiful buildings in the world wouldn't matter if people didn't feel safe walking between them. That summer, I changed my major to criminal justice, and I never looked back. The police academy was both exactly what I expected and nothing like I imagined. The physical demands were brutal, but manageable. Years of high school football had kept me in decent shape. It was the psychological aspects that truly challenged me. Learning to make split-second decisions that could mean life or death, understanding the complex dance between law and justice, recognizing that sometimes the right choice and the good choice aren't the same thing, these lessons reshaped my worldview. I graduated near the top of my class in 2009, just as the Great Recession was hitting Memphis hard. Those first few years on the force were a crash course in human nature. I saw people at their worst, desperate, angry, violent, but I also witnessed incredible acts of kindness and resilience. The homeless man who shared his last sandwich with a stray dog, the single mother working 3 jobs to keep her kids in school, the elderly couple who turned their home into an unofficial shelter for neighborhood kids who needed a safe place to stay. My partner during those early years was Marcus Johnson, a 20-year veteran who became more than a mentor. He became the big brother I never had. Marcus was a man of deep faith, but not the preachy kind. He lived it more than he talked about it. I watched him pray with victims and suspects alike, saw him buy groceries for families we'd encountered on domestic violence calls, observed how he treated every person, no matter their circumstances, with genuine respect. "Gabe," he told me once after a particularly rough shift, "this job will either make you bitter or better. The choice is yours, but remember, everyone we encounter is fighting a battle we know nothing about." Those words stuck with me, even after Marcus took early retirement following a knee injury in 2014. By then, I had developed a reputation as a solid, level-headed officer. I wasn't the type to make headlines or chase promotions. I simply did my job, tried to make a positive difference where I could, and kept my personal faith compartmentalized, something for Sundays and special occasions, not the messy reality of everyday police work. Marriage came later than expected. I met Sarah Chen, a trauma nurse at Methodist University Hospital, during a routine follow-up on an assault case in 2018. She had a quiet strength about her, an ability to remain calm in chaos that matched my own. Our courtship was swift but sure, and we married in a small ceremony the following spring. Sarah understood the demands of my job because she lived a similar reality in the ER. We both dealt with humanity at its most vulnerable, its most desperate, its most real. Our life together settled into a comfortable rhythm. We bought a small house in Cordova, attended church semi-regularly at Riverside where I'd grown up, and tried to make the most of our overlapping days off. We talked about having kids someday, but agreed to wait until we felt more settled in our careers. Looking back now, I realize how much I took that ordinary happiness for granted. By 2024, I had 15 years on the force and had seen just about everything, or so I thought. I'd worked in various units but always found myself drawn back to regular patrol work. There was something about being on the streets, directly engaging with the community, that felt right to me. My new partner, Mike Reynolds, was a younger officer with just 5 years of experience, but a good head on his shoulders. We made an effective team, balancing my experience with his enthusiasm. That year had been particularly challenging for law enforcement in Memphis. A new synthetic drug had hit the streets, something the labs were struggling to even identify. We'd seen a spike in violent crimes, and the department was stretched thin. Budget cuts had left us understaffed, and morale was low. But we kept doing our job, kept trying to make a difference, one shift at a time. The night of October 12th started like any other. Sarah had packed my dinner, her signature chicken stir-fry with extra broccoli, the way I liked it. We'd said our goodbyes in the driveway, sharing a quick kiss before I headed to the precinct for roll call. The autumn air had a bite to it, and the weather report was calling for fog rolling in from the river later that night. During briefing, Sergeant Martinez, no relation to Katie, warned us about increased gang activity in the warehouse district. There had been reports of a new player in the drug trade, someone willing to undercut the established dealers and ignore the unwritten rules that had kept relative peace in certain neighborhoods. We were told to be especially vigilant, but to avoid unnecessary risks. Remember, Martinez emphasized, we're understaffed tonight. Wait for backup on any suspicious activity calls. Better to let a suspect slip away than to lose an officer. Mike and I exchanged glances at that last comment. We'd been tracking a particular group of dealers for weeks, building a case slowly but surely. We both knew that if an opportunity presented itself, waiting for backup might mean losing months of work. It's strange how the mind can justify breaking protocol when you believe the end goal is worth it. The first few hours of our shift were routine. A couple of domestic disturbance calls that resolved peacefully, a minor fender bender near the university, and a false alarm at a convenience store. We'd just finished our meal break when the call came in at 2:27 a.m. Unit 47, suspicious activity reported at 1420 Riverport Road. Caller reports multiple subjects entering and exiting abandoned warehouse. Possible drug activity. I knew that address. The warehouse had been empty since its previous owner declared bankruptcy in 2022. Its location near the river made it perfect for illegal activities, multiple escape routes, poor lighting, and enough legitimate traffic in the area to mask suspicious movements. We'd had our eye on it as a potential distribution point for weeks. Unit 47 responding, I radioed back, already turning our cruiser toward the river district. Request backup units to set up perimeter. The fog had indeed rolled in thick from the Mississippi, creating an eerie atmosphere as we approached with lights off. The warehouse loomed ahead, a dark mass against the yellow-gray sky. The security light above the loading dock flickered erratically, creating moving shadows that made surveillance difficult. Mike killed the engine half a block away, and we approached on foot. Years of experience had taught me to trust my instincts, and something felt off about the situation. The air seemed charged with tension, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. I should have listened to that feeling. I should have waited for backup. I should have remembered Sergeant Martinez's warning. But 15 years of successful arrests and positive outcomes can make you overconfident. When we spotted two figures ducking behind a dumpster, my focus narrowed to the job at hand. The fog, the warning, the backup protocol, all of it faded into the background of what I thought was just another arrest waiting to happen. I couldn't have known that in less than 5 minutes, I would be lying on the cold concrete, my life bleeding out under the indifferent stars. I couldn't have known that what awaited me beyond the veil of death would forever change not just my understanding of reality, but the very essence of who I am. They say your life flashes before your eyes when you're about to die. That's not exactly true. What I experienced in those final conscious moments wasn't a highlight reel of memories. It was a sudden, crushing awareness of all the things I had left undone. The conversation I'd been meaning to have with Sarah about starting a family. The letter of forgiveness I'd never sent to my estranged brother. The deeper questions about faith and existence that I'd always pushed aside in favor of more practical concerns. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand the full context of that night, the sequence of choices and circumstances that led to my divine appointment. Because what happened next wasn't just about me, or even about the immediate impact on my family and fellow officers. It was about a message meant for everyone who has ever questioned whether there's more to existence than what we can see and touch and measure. This is my story, but in a deeper sense, it's everyone's story. It's about the thin line between the physical and spiritual realms, about the incredible love that undergirds all of reality, and about the shocking truth that heaven is closer than any of us dare to imagine. The first shot shattered the night's silence like a thunderclap. I remember the distinct sound it made as it ricocheted off the metal dumpster behind me, a high-pitched whine that seemed to hang in the fog-thick air. The second shot caught me in the chest, and even through my vest, the impact felt like being hit with a sledgehammer. But it was the third shot that changed everything. I distinctly remember the bizarre sensation of feeling the bullet pierce the unprotected area between my vest and neck. There was no immediate pain, just a strange warmth spreading across my chest and a peculiar lightness in my limbs. Time seemed to slow down, allowing me to notice details with extraordinary clarity. The rough texture of the concrete wall I slid down, the metallic taste filling my mouth, the way the security light above cast alternating patterns of light and shadow across the ground. Mike's voice reached me as if from underwater. "Officer down! Officer down! 10 to 13, shots fired at Riverport Warehouse." The words seemed to echo and distort, becoming increasingly distant. I tried to speak, to tell him I could feel myself slipping away, but my body no longer responded to my commands. The last physical sensation I remember was the cold. The concrete beneath me felt like ice, and a deep chill began spreading from my extremities inward. The fog above me seemed to be getting thicker, or maybe my vision was failing. The yellowed security light grew dimmer and dimmer, until finally, everything faded to black. But that darkness lasted only a moment. What happened next defies all rational explanation. The transition was instantaneous. One moment I was trapped in complete darkness, and the next, I was immersed in what I can only describe as living light. This wasn't merely illumination, it was consciousness itself made visible. Imagine if understanding could shine, if love could radiate light, if truth itself could glow. That begins to approach what I experienced. The first thing that struck me was the complete absence of fear. All my life I'd carried various forms of fear. Fear of failure, fear of not measuring up, fear of letting people down, and yes, fear of death. But in that moment, every trace of fear simply dissolved. It wasn't pushed away or overcome. It was revealed as utterly meaningless, like being afraid of shadows after the sun has risen. I became aware that I was experiencing reality in a way that transcended physical senses. I wasn't seeing with eyes or hearing with ears. I was perceiving truth directly, unfiltered by physical limitations. The closest analogy I can draw is the difference between reading about a place and actually being there, but even that falls woefully short. In this state, I realized that what we call consciousness in our physical existence is merely a tiny fraction of our true awareness. It was as if I'd spent my entire life looking at reality through a keyhole, and suddenly the door had been thrown wide open. The sheer volume of information and understanding that flooded my awareness would have been overwhelming if not for the profound sense of peace that accompanied it. I became aware of what I can only describe as the architecture of reality. I saw how the physical and spiritual realms interlock and interact, how prayer creates ripples in the fabric of existence, how every choice we make sends vibrations through multiple dimensions of reality. The universe I perceived was far more complex and interconnected than anything I had imagined, yet at the same time, it was held together by a single, unifying force: love. This love wasn't the emotional or sentimental kind we usually think of. It was something far more fundamental, the very foundation of existence itself. I understood that this love was not just an emotion or a choice, but the actual force that holds atoms together, that keeps planets in their orbits, that gives life its meaning and purpose. Every particle of creation was saturated with it. Then I became aware of a presence. How do you describe encountering the source of all existence? How do you put into words the experience of being in the presence of perfect love, perfect wisdom, perfect power? The language of Earth feels as inadequate as trying to describe a symphony using mathematical equations. I felt him before I saw him. The sensation was like being immersed in an ocean of pure love and acceptance, but even that metaphor falls short. Every cell of my being, though I no longer had physical cells, resonated with recognition. This was what, or rather who, I had been searching for my entire life without even knowing it. Then, Jesus was there. Let me be clear. This was not the gentle, somewhat passive Jesus often depicted in religious art. This was the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the one through whom and for whom all things were created. His presence carried an authority that made every earthly power seem like a child playing at leadership. Yet at the same time, he radiated such love and acceptance that I felt completely known and completely safe. His appearance defied physical description. He was more real, more solid, more present than anything I had ever encountered in physical existence. Light emanated not just from him, but through him, as if he were the source of that living light I had first encountered. His eyes, those eyes held the depth of eternity itself. When he looked at me, I felt simultaneously exposed to my core and loved beyond measure. "Gabriel," he said, and in that one word, I understood more about my true identity than I had in all my years on earth. My name, spoken by him, contained the full story of who I was created to be, who I had become, and who I was meant to be. It was like hearing my name for the first time, though I had heard it countless times before. What followed was not so much a conversation in words as it was an exchange of pure understanding. He began showing me truths about existence that would take multiple lifetimes to fully comprehend. I saw how every moment of time exists simultaneously in God's reality, yet our choices remain genuinely free. I witnessed how angels and demons operate in the physical realm, usually unseen but profoundly influential. I understood how prayer works, not as a way of convincing God to do something, but as a collaboration between divine and human will. He showed me events from my life, but from heaven's perspective. I saw the morning I had stopped to help a homeless man outside the precinct, an incident I had almost forgotten. From this vantage point, I witnessed how that simple act of kindness had set in motion a chain of events that would impact generations. The man, whose name I had never known, was so moved by the encounter that he found the courage to reconnect with his estranged daughter. Their reconciliation led to healing in their family that would influence their descendants for generations to come. But I also saw the moments I had missed, opportunities for kindness I had passed by, chances to show love that I had ignored. Yet even these revelations came without condemnation. Instead, they were shown to me as lessons, helping me understand the true weight and significance of every moment, every choice, every interaction. I witnessed how heaven responds to events on earth. I saw angels rejoicing over prayers offered in simple faith, over acts of forgiveness, over moments of genuine repentance. I watched as heavenly beings moved in response to human choices, how spiritual battles were fought over seemingly mundane decisions, how the simplest act of kindness could release tremendous spiritual power. Then he began showing me deeper truths about the nature of reality itself. I understood that what we call the supernatural is actually the most natural thing there is. It's our limited physical existence that is the temporary, artificial construct. The spiritual realm isn't up there somewhere. It interpenetrates every aspect of physical reality. Heaven isn't a distant place. It's a dimension that exists alongside and within our physical world, separated only by our limited perception. I saw how time itself works differently from heaven's perspective. From there, all of history, past, present, and future, exists in what I can only describe as an eternal now. Yet somehow, our choices remain genuinely free and meaningful. It's a paradox my human mind still struggles to comprehend, but in that state, it made perfect sense. He showed me how every prayer is heard, how every tear is seen, how every act of faith sends ripples through eternity. I witnessed how heaven's resources are constantly available to earth, waiting only for human cooperation through faith and obedience to be released. The barrier between heaven and earth, I learned, isn't distance but dimension, and that barrier is far thinner than most people imagine. Perhaps the most profound revelation was about the nature of human identity. I saw how each person is actually an eternal being, temporarily housed in a physical body, but destined for an existence far beyond our earthly understanding. Every person I had ever encountered, from my closest family members to the suspects I had arrested, was revealed as an eternal soul of infinite worth and potential. Then he showed me something about my own life and calling that left me stunned. My work as a police officer wasn't just about maintaining law and order. It was about being his hands and feet in some of the darkest moments of people's lives. Every call I responded to was an opportunity to bring heaven's perspective, heaven's love, heaven's justice into broken situations. I saw how many times I had been protected by angels during dangerous situations, how many prayers had been answered without my awareness, how many lives had been touched through my actions when I wasn't even aware of it. But I also saw how much more effective I could have been if I had been more aware of the spiritual reality surrounding me. The experience of time in this state was peculiar. It felt like I was there for both an instant and an eternity. Every revelation contained depths within depths, and each truth opened up new vistas of understanding. Yet there was never any sense of being overwhelmed. It was more like watching a flower unfold, each petal revealing new beauty at exactly the right pace. I became aware that decisions were being made about my return. I understood that my experience wasn't just for my own benefit. It was meant to be shared, to help others understand the reality of God's love and the true nature of our existence. But before I could return, he had one final message to share, one that would become the foundation of everything I would do from that moment forward. Before my return to physical existence, Jesus shared a final message that would become the cornerstone of my new understanding. His words carried a weight and authority that transcended mere verbal communication. Each phrase seemed to embed itself directly into my soul. "Gabriel," he began, his voice resonating with both infinite power and intimate tenderness. "What you have witnessed here is not meant to remain a private revelation. You are being sent back as a living testimony to the reality of my love and the truth about existence that so many have forgotten or never known." He then revealed to me what he called the great deception of our time. Not any particular false teaching or ideology, but the fundamental misconception about the nature of reality itself. "Your world has divided existence into natural and supernatural," he explained, "but this division exists only in human perception. What you call supernatural is simply the fuller reality that your physical senses cannot yet perceive. Heaven is not up there somewhere. It interpenetrates every molecule of physical creation." He showed me how this misunderstanding has affected everything from personal faith to scientific inquiry. The greatest barrier between humanity and truth isn't intellectual, it's perceptual. You don't need more information, you need awakened awareness. The evidence of my presence surrounds every person at every moment, but they have been trained to interpret reality through a lens that filters out the spiritual dimension. Then he turned to more personal matters, specifically addressing my role as a police officer. "When you return," he said, "you will see your work differently. Every call you respond to is an intersection between heaven and earth, an opportunity for divine intervention. You are not just enforcing human laws, you are representing my justice, my mercy, my love, in situations where people are experiencing their darkest moments." He showed me specific scenarios I would encounter after my return. Moments where a word of kindness would prevent a suicide, where a simple prayer would break cycles of addiction, where showing mercy would lead to profound transformation. "Remember," he emphasized, "no moment is ordinary when viewed from heaven's perspective. The smallest act of genuine love carries more power than all the darkness in existence." Then came the most profound part of his final message. A truth about the nature of human identity that he said was crucial for our time. Tell them, he said, that they are not physical beings having occasional spiritual experiences. They are eternal beings having a temporary physical experience. Every person you encounter is an immortal soul wearing a temporary body. When you truly understand this, it transforms how you see everyone and everything. He spoke about the times we are living in, though not in terms of specific dates or events. You are living in a season of acceleration, he said, where the veil between the physical and spiritual realms is becoming increasingly thin. More and more people will begin to experience supernatural realities, whether they are prepared for it or not. Your testimony will help them understand what they are experiencing. Then he gave me specific instructions about sharing my experience. When you tell your story, some will doubt, some will mock, and some will be transformed. Do not be concerned with defending your experience. Focus on conveying my love. The truth of what you have witnessed will resonate with those who are ready to receive it. He added something that still moves me deeply every time I think about it. And remember, the greatest miracle isn't what happened to you during these minutes of clinical death. The greatest miracle is what happens every time a heart turns toward me in simple faith. Every moment of genuine prayer, every act of sacrificial love, every choice to forgive, these are the real miracles that transform the world. The return to my body was not the gentle transition I might have expected. It felt like being compressed from infinite expansion back into a tiny, confined space. Every truth, every revelation, every moment of understanding had to somehow be translated back into the limited framework of human consciousness. I gasped awake to a chaos of sensations and sounds. The cold concrete beneath me, the metallic taste of blood in my mouth, the urgent voices of paramedics, Mike's tearful exclamation of relief, the wail of sirens, everything felt simultaneously overwhelming and strangely distant, as if I was experiencing it through a filter. The medical team later told me I had been clinically dead for exactly 11 minutes and 15 seconds. The lead trauma surgeon, Dr. Sarah Martinez, would later tell me that my recovery defied medical explanation. The damage from the gunshot should have been fatal, and even if survival had been possible, I should have suffered significant brain damage from the prolonged oxygen deprivation. The physical recovery was challenging, but it was nothing compared to the challenge of integrating my experience into daily life. How do you return to normal after experiencing the ultimate reality? How do you engage in ordinary conversations when every word now carries eternal weight? How do you look at people the same way after seeing their true nature as eternal beings? The truth is, you don't. You can't. And that's exactly the point. The changes in my life were both subtle and profound. On the surface, I returned to my role as a police officer, but everything about how I approached my work was transformed. Every interaction became an opportunity to bring heaven's perspective into earthly situations. Every crisis call became a chance to demonstrate divine love in practical ways. My fellow officers noticed the difference, though their reactions varied widely. Some, like Mike, were deeply impacted by what happened and became more open to spiritual realities themselves. Others maintained a respectful distance, perhaps uncomfortable with the intensity of my conviction. A few openly skeptical ones attributed the changes to PTSD or the psychological impact of a near-death experience. But the proof was in the results. My arrest rates didn't drop, but my approach to law enforcement changed dramatically. I began seeing beyond the immediate crimes to the underlying spiritual and emotional wounds that drove criminal behavior. This didn't make me less effective. If anything, it made me more so. Suspects were more likely to cooperate. Victims found genuine comfort, rather than just procedural support, and even hardened criminals occasionally showed signs of transformation. My relationship with Sarah deepened in ways I hadn't thought possible. She had always been a woman of faith, but now we shared a spiritual intimacy that transcended ordinary marriage. She became my partner not just in life but in ministry, as we found ourselves increasingly involved in helping others understand the reality of God's presence in their daily lives. The shooting suspect, Marcus Reynolds, was eventually caught and charged. When I learned he was facing trial, I did something that surprised everyone. I requested to meet with him in prison. That meeting became one of the most powerful demonstrations of everything I had learned during my time in eternity. I found him sitting in the prison visiting room, shackled and wearing an orange jumpsuit. The fear and defiance in his eyes reminded me of what Jesus had shown me about seeing beyond physical appearances to the eternal soul within. Before he could speak, I said something that clearly caught him off guard. "I forgive you, and I want you to know that God loves you more than you can imagine." What followed was a 3-hour conversation that led to a profound transformation, not just for Marcus, but for both of us. He had been running from God his entire life, convinced he was too far gone for redemption. By the end of our meeting, he had encountered the same love that had transformed me, though in a different way. Today, he leads a prison ministry that has helped hundreds of inmates find hope and purpose. My experience has taught me that the veil between heaven and earth is far thinner than most people realize. Prayer is not shouting into a void, hoping someone is listening. It's participating in a conversation that never ceases. Worship is not a religious activity. It's tapping into the very frequency of heaven. Faith is not blind belief. It's choosing to align ourselves with the ultimate reality that surrounds us at every moment. Every day, I encounter people who are hungry for something more than the material world can offer. They may not use spiritual language to describe their longing, but I recognize it now. It's the eternal soul within them crying out for connection with its source. Sometimes they're wearing a business suit, sometimes prison clothes, sometimes a police uniform. But beneath these temporary garments, they're all eternal beings searching for their way home. The greatest challenge has been learning to live effectively in both realms, to be fully engaged in earthly responsibilities while maintaining constant awareness of the spiritual reality that interpenetrates everything. It's like learning to see in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Some days I manage it better than others, but the awareness of that greater reality never leaves me. I continue my work as a police officer, though with a radically different perspective. Every call is an opportunity, every interaction a potential divine appointment. I've learned that the most powerful weapon in law enforcement isn't carried on my belt. It's the ability to see beyond physical circumstances to the eternal significance of each moment. To those reading this account, I want to emphasize something crucial. What I experienced wasn't meant to be a unique revelation. The truths I learned are available to everyone, though perhaps not through such dramatic means. The love I encountered, the reality I witnessed, the presence I experienced, these are accessible to every person at every moment. Don't wait for a near-death experience to discover these truths. They're available right now, waiting to be embraced. Heaven isn't a distant place you go when you die. It's a reality that surrounds you at this very moment. God isn't far away, watching from a distance. He's closer than your next breath, waiting with infinite patience and perfect love for you to turn your heart toward Him. The greatest shock of my near-death experience wasn't what I saw in heaven. It was realizing that this same glory, this same love, this same divine presence is available to every person, at every moment, in every situation. We don't have to die to access it. We just have to open our hearts to receive it. And that perhaps is the most transformative truth of all.